Do you know, I think, again, I remember at the time, so places like UCL, LSE, even King's, a lot of the student base are postgraduate, so they're quite a lot older, so it's quite a grown-up experience. But also a lot of the students, and this is changed when it was 20 years ago when I went, the proportion of international students was really high. So you had people coming from all over the world to come and study in London, and they really wanted that London experience because they've never lived in the UK. So again, it's not, there was the London sort of lifestyle. I was like, well, I've got to get the train up to sort of Hull and want to go and see my parents. That's far away, and London's this big bad city. And so there's that part. And also doing economics, it turned from having this great class of mates, of which I'm still in touch with a few of them, and these teachers, to lectures and very formal stuff and sort of very different theory and a lot drier. And it went from being really engaging at school to really, really dry.
From Coordinate Sports, it's The Drive Phase, a show about sports founders, leaders and experts and the stories behind their business journeys. Our guest this episode is Tom Gribbin, co-founder and CEO of Planet Super League. Tom co-founded Planet Super League to combine three psychological drivers he was well versed in: a passion for football, the digital space, and influencing environmentally friendly lifestyle changes. Consistently taking positive climate action can be challenging. Planet Super League has been successful in capturing football fans' passion for their team and competition to make lifestyle changes. During the episode, we discussed Tom's early life and school sport experience, his career in sustainability, and his first startup, children's activity tracking company Boost. We also dig into the role that sport plays in Tom's well-being and how it helps to balance the stresses of being a startup CEO. Enjoy the show. I'm delighted to welcome my guest to the show today. It's Tom Gribbin, co-founder and CEO of Planet Super League, the venture that uses the power of football to inspire people to live more sustainably. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Thanks for having me, James.
No, really welcome. And we're just having a bit of a chat, then reminiscing about our childhoods growing up in East Yorkshire. But I'm going to start with you first and talk about what your childhood was like, actually. I know you're really keen Nottingham Forest fan. Would you say that's kind of one of your earliest sporting memories? And was that the heyday of Nottingham Forest then, growing up?
Yeah, loads to get into, James. I'm the eldest of four children. So my parents had me when they were really young. They were about 22. So they were very active because they were in their 20s. So my dad was always into sport and competitive and that sort of thing. And then I had a brother, Ben, who was born just a couple of years after me. So having, two boys and a young dad, he just basically, to keep us busy, we were playing football in the garden, we were jumping on the trampoline, we were going bike riding up and down the driveway or in the park and whatever. And so it was just part of growing up, I think. And I look back as, all the values and the really important stuff that they taught me that I try and, teach my children as well. But I do think that sort of sport and physical activity and interactions, they were such a big part of my life. And the thing is that I'm quite good at a whole bunch of sports. I'm not amazing at any sport. But if you put a pool cue in my hand, I'm decent at pool, and I can hit a dartboard, and I can play badminton, and I can play tennis, I can play squash, and I can kick a football, and I play basketball now in my at 40. I play basketball quite a few times a week. And so it was just part of my childhood. And because I had a brother who was really good at football and really sporty, that's what we gravitated to, watching and then playing. And yeah, at the time, living in Nottingham, my first game was Forest against Liverpool. I think we might have lost that 2-1, but then a year later, my dad got a season ticket at the City Ground. And so I grew up, and this was at towards the back end.
Stan Collymore times.
It was even a bit earlier than Stan Collymore, because it was still Brian Clough. So this was, you had like Des Walker, Stuart Pearce, Nigel Clough, Roy Keane. And so Forest in Nottingham, and this is how it's changed so much, we had 3 or 4 England internationals. We were a sort of top 5 Division 1 team, as it was called back then. And I went to 2 League Cup finals, Carabao Cups nowadays. I was at the FA Cup, the game against Tottenham, that Gaza did that sort of horror challenge, and Lineker missed a penalty, but Spurs won it. And so growing up, Forest were like a brilliant team. And like most people at school were Forest fans. There were a few Man U fans and most people supported Forest because they were good. And you go back the poor kids in Nottingham now, hardly any of them have got Forest shirts on. And Forest in the last, it's really sad. It's been 20 odd years outside the top flight. And Forest played Liverpool in the FA Cup last weekend, as this has been recorded. But we knocked out Arsenal and Leicester in previous rounds. But the media were hyping up, this is a huge game for Forest. But me as a kid, it wasn't. This used to be...
Yeah, bread and butter game, yeah.
Exactly. So, and it's funny, actually, when I moved up to Hull, Hull were in the sort of third, fourth division, playing at Boothferry Park with Terry Dolan. And I remember going to a game and just thinking, this is awful.
What is this? Yeah.
What is this?
£5,000, £2,000.
Yeah. And then Hull went on this transformation and a sort of in a bit of a struggling times, I guess, ups and downs. But yeah, it's amazing how I think your local football club particularly, it really does permeate the community, whether you're a fan of that club or not. It's a massive part of the establishment of that city.
Definitely, yeah, and definitely leaving lasting memories and stuff. In terms of school, you mentioned that you moved up to Hull. What was your school life like? So academically, not really accomplished, but was that what it was all about for you, or was sport still a driving factor when you went through school?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually got lots of mixed memories of school. So academically, the school I went to up in Hull was a really good school, and I remember going from a sort of regular primary school, and I was already needing to sort of make up quite a lot of ground from most of the kids that were in the primary of the feeder school before. So I did feel I've got a bit of catching up to do quite quickly. Going into a Latin lesson or a French lesson, I've never done any of this in my life. So there was this sort of a bit of a baptism of fire, and not knowing anybody, and the whole family moved up. So there was sort of getting to know people. But from a sport perspective, it was a rugby school.
I was going to say rugby and cricket.
And I remember playing. Rugby's probably the worst. So you can't tell in this podcast, obviously, but I'm 6'5". So I'm a big lad. And immediately they're like, right, Gribbin, you're playing second row. And I'm like, I don't even know. I've actually, of all the sports, I've never picked up a rugby ball.
Yeah, what's second row?
What is second row? And I realized it's for the meatheads, basically. that's where your ears get mashed up. And your job is to really not touch the ball. Your job is just to tackle and to be tackled. And the thing is, although I'm big, I'm not aggressive. That's not my sporting personality. So I absolutely hated rugby because I just didn't like the contact of it. But it was a rugby school, so they made me play in the B team my whole way through. As much as I didn't want to, they made you play and go on the coach trips and play, and I was useless. So I sort of was made to play. I remember one game though, it was a home match, and my dad came down to watch. And this isn't me, but I really didn't like it, so I just couldn't really be bothered. So I got subbed at half time, and me and my dad we were in the B team. I walked to the next pitch, which was the A team, the under 15s or whatever it was at the time. And my dad were watching it, and one of our players got injured, and they had no subs. And so the sort of head of sport said, "Oi, Gribbin, you're on." Oh, what do you mean? You're on. So I went from sort of just watching them, and I knew who they all were, and I sort of trundled on the pitch, and they were all looking at me going, What are you doing? Yeah. And anyway, I had the game of my life. And I don't know if it was a turning point, but I remember going, do you know what? I've got to really try here, because this lot are way better than me, and I don't want to embarrass myself. And I remember working my socks off in that game. I didn't then fall in love with rugby, don't get me wrong. But yeah,
maybe a bit of a lesson learned though, like a little light bulb went off. Was that for other areas? Do you use that elsewhere?
Do you know what I think it was? And the thing that I'll talk probably a lot about as a life thing and a work thing is resilience. And I had some. I think the other thing about being tall and so big is that you literally stand out. And so you can't hide, and you can't hide in the classroom. And a part of my personality is I'm a bit of an extrovert, I'm a bit of a chatterbox, and I've got a bit of a sharp tongue, particularly at a young age. So when you've got nowhere to hide, you do get sort of picked on, I guess. You're more open to it, I guess. So I do think there were times at school where I did really struggle about fitting in, more because I wasn't amazing at sport. I wasn't like the geek academic. I was all right at music, but I wasn't, like a baby musician. And I do feel, I think with today's sort of younger generation, this real pressure to like find your thing and to then like go for it. And I just think I coach some basketball in Oxford where I live, and I really love it. And talk to these young lads, 16, 17, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, and they're all sort of under all this pressure to find their passion, and then you've got to go for it. And I get that as an approach, but it's not that easy to find your passion.
You got to take some time to work out who you actually are as well, to know like what your passion is. Like at 15, 16, it's a difficult.
I think so.
Picking subjects is hard enough, isn't it? Picking subjects or going to university.
It is. And I think, some people are naturally gifted. My sister she's a vet, and ever since she was 5 or 6, she's just obsessed with animals. She just loved animals, and she'll say she kind of loves animals more than people, and she just nurtured animals, and she's perfect. She found her thing, and it just naturally happened. And again, it's sport. Like if you're really quick, oh look, you'll be good, right? You'll be in the athletics team, right? You'll join an athletics club. All right, you can maybe run for your unit. All right, and you can see a pathway. And I think so. If you do have natural gifts, or you are lucky enough to be struck by something or someone, but I do think it's hard when you're at school and you've got multiple different subjects going on, extracurricular stuff. You've got who knows what your family situation's like at home, and the environment that you grow up in. And I remember actually back to sport, I played quite a lot of tennis, and I got pretty good at tennis. And at time there was cricket on at school, and the head teacher said, "Gribbin, you're playing cricket this week?" I said, no, I've got a tennis game for my Cottingham, my tennis club. They said, well, you have to cancel the tennis because you're playing for school. And I was like, well, I want to play tennis. And so school, in a way, it just didn't quite, the sport thing, it didn't quite fit, it didn't quite align. If they were a big tennis school, and it was funny actually, in the sixth form, I played in the first team tennis, and I was the only player in my year that played tennis. It was everyone in the other years above and below me that also played. So I just sort of, I say didn't fit in. I played playing basketball, which is what I still do. My dad put a hoop up in the garden at home. So, and being taller, naturally you sort of look at a sport like that. And then my cousin, again up in Hull, took me down to the local club, and they signed me up. And this was when I was 16 and 17. And they just said, right, run around, like rebound. We'll teach you to shoot, but just rebound, like a bit like Dennis Rodman did for Chicago Bulls. Yeah. And I got really good at basketball, played junior national league that year, won most improved player, which is a great perseverance. I was pretty useless when I started, but I was all right at the end of it. But then at school, there was a bunch of us that wanted to play basketball, but there was a court in the sports hall, but there wasn't a team. Yeah. And so we did play we played Hazelmount, we played, Hull Grammar and all these other schools, but we had to sort of hodgepodge a team together of people that sort of wanted to play. And I was actually one of the best players there, but because the school didn't, if that was rugby or cricket, I'd have had colours. I'd have been, I'd have got that recognition because that's what the school was known for. Whereas basketball or even tennis was just a sort of sideline thing. And I think that's, I don't mean to sound bitter by it, because you carry on, and school's just one part of your life. But I do look back and think, you know what, there'll be kids now in any school that have got a particular interest, particularly passionate about something. But if that school isn't noticing that and catering for that, I do sort of worry that people then sort of feel a little bit disillusioned.
Well, that's that moment as well, whether you're going to get inspired by or switched off, like your first chance of, like you said, you were sporty, could turn your hand to different sports. Obviously, family was active. If your family wasn't so active and the school was like maybe discouraging it, it could have been that you didn't take it up again, kind of things. People on the fence whether to engage or not. But hopefully, like I said, move forward a little bit in most schools, and now there's that kind of willingness, or enrichment is a big thing in terms of bringing new sports and giving access and exposure. So hopefully it's a bit different, but just moving forward educationally, I mean, you finished up at school, sixth form, etc., and you travelled down to London then, so you studied, was it economics you studied down in London?
I did, and that's
my question in terms of, was that obviously a conscious decision? What was behind it? Did you see a career in the city, or what was the plan?
There are probably three things that at the time sort of took me down that pathway. One, we had two amazing teachers at school. So we did it was an A-level that we did in economics, and two brilliant teachers in macro and microeconomics, both completely opposite. One of them was the sort of big rugby player, big lad, and a lot of camaraderie and a lot of banter. But another guy was this sort of eccentric Welsh guy. And we had this class there were about 10 of us in it. And I was so lucky because most of them were just sort of geniuses. Just naturally, they were very, very bright. They were the sort of stereotype you'd say, like, go and work in the city or hedge funds or investment banking. And a bunch of them actually do that now. So I was in this class of these sort of just real talent with these great teachers. So I loved it, and I got a good grade in it. And I thought, this is exciting. So that was one part of it. My other part was my dad worked in business, works in the food industry called Northern Foods, who used to be based up in Hull, which is why we moved up there. And so he'd always worked in a food manufacturing and business space. So, he was a big part of me kind of understanding the world of business from a young age, just because he used to come home and talk about what he did. And that was it. So I think that part of it was that sort of household influence, but in a very soft way. He wasn't, son, you're going to go and do economics and this at the end. It wasn't like that. It was just more osmosis. And I think the third point to your kind of setup is, it's one of those degrees that certainly opens doors and gives you options. I mean, there are such things as economists, but I didn't want to be an economist, but the kind of intellectual rigor you put to something, or business strategy, so I do think it was one that it gave me the opportunity to open doors. But it's funny, again, I don't want this to be a theme of the podcast, but went down to UCL, who have got an amazing economics department. You needed really good grades to get in there. And I really shouldn't have gone to London. I just wasn't the scene. It's funny, because until my brother, he went to Leeds 2 years after me, and he was good at football, but he had the Leeds sort of student lifestyle, where you are a student living in the student part of the city, and you go into the social events and the pubs where it is 50p a pint or whatever, and you're having that experience with I'm at UCL, living just off Gower Street near Warren Street Station in student digs, and you're going out in sort of Soho to some student bar, and it's £4 for a vodka Red Bull. I'm like, this is, and you're in the middle of London, so when we go as adults, we're like, all right, it's a big night out in London or whatever, but you didn't get that student, I think, experience. I think it wasn't on a campus in and of itself. And, London's a big kind of mean city. And so
I guess was that the same with your peers in like your fellow students? Were they a lot more, I don't want to say focused, everyone is at uni, they're there for a reason, but obviously, were they not after that experience as well?
I think, again, I remember at the time, so places like UCL, LSE, even King's, a lot of the student base are postgraduate, so they're quite a lot older, so it's quite a grown-up experience. But also a lot of the students, and this has changed when it was 20 years ago when I went, the proportion of international students was really high. So you had people coming from all over the world to come and study in London, and they really wanted that London experience because they've never lived in the UK. So again, it's not, there was the London sort of lifestyle. I was like, well, I've got to get the train up to sort of Hull and want to go and see my parents. That's far away, and London's this big bad city. And so there's that part. And also doing economics, it turned from having this great class of mates, of which I'm still in touch with a few of them, and these teachers, to lectures and very formal stuff, and sort of very different theory, and a lot drier. And it went from being really engaging at school to really, really dry. And I look back, and I was supposed to go to Manchester and do international management and American business studies. And basically I got glandular fever, and I didn't quite get the grades for UCL, which was top choice, but they let me in anyway. And I look back and go, oh God, I wish I'd gone to Manchester. I've had a year in America, and I've had that Manchester style. So it's not regrets. I came out with my degree, but I tell you what, I scraped my 2-1. I was in my second year, my average was sort of 50, and that counted for half the degree. So in the third year, I just said, right, I've got one chance here. And I just studied like mad and did all my coursework just to finish and get it done. So, you look at it, like you say, like you've looked me up on LinkedIn and gone, oh, you've got a degree in economics. Like, there's a backstory that is actually quite different from, again, a bunch of people would have flown out there, gone to work at Goldman Sachs or hedge fund, and have pursued that passion. But I came out of a degree in economics and then worked in marketing at Nestle, and no one else who did economics did that. It's just that wasn't the path. They did an accountancy course at KPMG or whatever it was, or they went to work in a management consultant. So another reflection of my sort of career, sort of taking a sort of different direction from what you might see on the surface.
Yeah, and I guess that's honestly my next conversation was around that. And your career's been done so many things, and we try and fit as many as we can into the pod. But would you kind of, if you were going to define it, would you class yourself as a marketeer? Firstly, is that what you, in terms of your not your skill set, but like if you had to define yourself? Probably
in a really broad sense, I think marketing and this, another word of sort of innovation. And the reason I talk about innovation is, and I do a bit of teaching at UCL, ironically, on this stuff. The definition of innovation is something novel and new. And everyone gets that when you say, what is innovation? Novel and new, something that's not been there before. But there's a second element to it. It has to add value. It has to be valuable. So a baby's babble you may hear a sound from a baby that you've never heard before. You go, is that innovation? Yeah, it's novel and new, but is it value? No, not really. So I've spent so much of I think, I was on this Nestle graduate scheme and learned some of the building blocks of, business and stuff. And then I worked in a creative advertising agency, and I've worked in sustainability and startups. And actually where I really get excited are those sort of blank piece of paper, or here's a problem statement, or a thing that, isn't quite working, and trying to ideate and come up with new ways of approaching that problem and issue. So marketing is absolutely a part of it. And the grounding that I got in Nestle and in the advertising industry. The ad industry is fascinating, right? And it's changed a little bit since I was there, but the basic premise is this. I remember this when I was in it, this sort of internet was nothing like it is today. But these companies spend millions of pounds putting ads on television in between, breaks of programs, football matches, let's say at halftime. And they've got a few seconds to capture your imagination and try and get you to do something, which generally is go to a website, go to a shop, try this, take a test drive, whatever it may be. And so the job of that advertising agency is to help Weetabix sell more Weetabix, or help you buy a Nissan Leaf, or, eat a McDonald's, or whatever it may be. And so you're trying to persuade somebody through the means of, visual stimulation, words, music, a great thing. And that is an incredibly difficult job to do. And so you work with this talent of just these amazing strategy people and creative people and production people. And my job in that role was to make it all happen. I was the account manager, basically. And we used to make ads for Halifax. And you might remember Howard Brown, the singing band, and so, but that was, at the time, that was some of the most successful advertising in the market, where you took a load of, you took this guy, Howard, you came up with a parody of a well-known song about a mortgage or a loan or a bank account. And then they spent £1 million making that ad, and then, 10 million pounds or whatever, putting it on television. And you're like, this is madness. But that's how sort of, I opened my eyes going into that industry. And that's where I've, been in and around, not as glamorous as spending those sorts of budgets, but using the power of creativity and different approaches and technology to try and influence people.
Yeah, and that storytelling, I mean, like that example for Halifax, it still resonates. And anyone who saw that advert, and maybe TV ads maybe don't do the same now, just the way we get ads, how we consume ads, but definitely left a lasting legacy. A couple of things I'm really interested to talk to you about, and we mentioned one before we started recording, which was startup. And you mentioned there that you're some teaching, some lecturing on the course at UCL. And that's entrepreneurship, right? Yeah.
So at UCL, I did economics, and you could do all these elective modules, and the management side of stuff there were sort of these little modules. So I took as many as I could. And the teacher there, Richard Pettinger, I just thought, I should be doing stuff like this. So I took all of his classes, all the ones I could. And then I left UCL, worked a bit, and then I think we got in touch on Facebook or something like that. And he said, oh, why don't you come and give a guest lecture and a talk? And I'd love to. Anyway, fast forward to now, I've been helping Richard out, who's still at UCL. So he taught me, and he's still teaching today, all these sort of 18, 20-year-olds. And I've helped Richard out on his Foundations for Management course. It's a first-year undergrad course in the School of Management, which is now massive. Didn't exist when I was there. And then I was looking at, again, my zigzag career. I ended up being a module leader on the Entrepreneurship Masters at UCL. And I taught product development and prototyping. So that's, when you've got your idea, how do you start to prototype that thing, whether it's a physical product or a digital service, and blueprint that, and how you're going to test it and what you're going to learn and iterate it and stuff. So that was fascinating, because it basically took all my real world stuff, a bunch of books and, material out there, and had to build a 10-week module from scratch. And I had about a month to do it. And I've never had to spend so many hours in my life on probably takes 10 hours to build an hour's worth of content from a lecture perspective. And these were 3 hours. So you had 3 hours in the classroom with these master's students with a lot of imposter syndrome. But my angle of it is like, no, I've done this in the real world. I'm not an academic, I'm a real world practitioner. So yeah, UCL was good, but I realized that actually what I love doing is the actual stuff, and being,
it sounds like when you were talking about the course initially, your course was like dry and maybe hard to digest, might have been the environment. But nowadays, for young people wanting to learn about business, it's a lot more exciting, a lot more engaging, I think, in terms of entrepreneurship. And we're doing a show now, obviously, around sports business, but there's so much content out there that you consume rather than just a big textbook and purely the theory of economics. And it sounds like you've made a course that's obviously 3 hours a piece. It has to be engaging, doesn't it, to get people on board?
Yeah, it does. And if you're entrepreneurial minded, it's the most exciting time. Again, you might have life circumstances that make it harder for you, but if you've got an idea to sell, make something and sell it, those tech platforms, the SaaS platforms now are so simple to connect together. A Shopify site with a payment platform, with your social media stuff, and put the content out there, and you've got an e-commerce platform out of the box. I mean, back when I graduated in 2002, if you said to me, right, Tom, I don't know, sell gift cards online or whatever it may be, I go, you're going to need £500,000.
Yeah, maybe more. Yeah, to get a service.
To just build the infrastructure, and you'll know this from your work. Whereas nowadays, you and I could start a gift card business or whatever it was, and we could
do it off Instagram, I suppose, or TikTok.
Exactly, and we could do it. We could do it for £100 a month, basically, off some SaaS platform. So I do think that's really exciting for people, that the opportunities are now just
and I feel as well the barriers are disappearing as well. So you've got like access to information, like you said, manufacture, anything like that. 20 years ago, you wouldn't know. You'd have to go to the library and research and find all the books and try and find a part. Nowadays, you've got access to anything you want to know. Can we talk a little bit about your startup? So it was. Did this come out of the lecturing and like building the course, things like that? And you thought, right, I want to launch something on my own, or was it you met some partners? How did it kind of?
First startup was called Boost, and it actually came before the UCL teaching or the module leading stuff. I was in a healthcare innovation lab, and we were looking at early stage propositions. How do you speed up a clinical trial? How do you support the lung cancer community? How do you help someone going through, treatment for cancer or something like that? And these knotty problems that are fraught with existing systems and, very emotional stuff as well. So learned a lot about the space of healthcare, and at the same time had a big client that we were working for, but this is the innovation lab of all these amazing people. I thought, I've got this itch that I really need to scratch. I'd done an MBA, so I went back to uni in my early 30s and lived in student digs for a year. During the week, drove home to see my wife, weekends in my washing, and so I'd done this MBA as well and been in this lab, and I thought I've got to do something. So I was on the board at Nottingham Forest Community Trust. So you probably know all the football clubs have a sort of charitable arm attached to it that use the badge in the club to go out and engage in education and health and all sorts of things. And I was on the board of Forests, being a Forest fan. And I remember all these doing all these soccer schools and all these sort of programs of physical activity. And I remember saying to Graham, the chief exec, what data are we getting? So we know that the kids are enjoying it because they're coming back and they're turning up each week. But are we helping fight obesity? Are these kids getting their steps in or whatever? And there was just no way of knowing. And I thought, well, actually, I'm going to play around here. So while I was working, I bought some really cheap pedometers called Mi Bands. They're about £10 each. This again was quite a few years ago, so they're nowhere near, like the Apple Watch hadn't come out. There's no real sophistication. There were some with a sort of screen with your steps, but the battery didn't last very long. Well, I bought these ones without that, and I gave them to 10 kids doing a soccer school, which is just a sort of cheap childcare for parents, and the kids have a load of time. Got them to run around with these bands, took them off at the end of it, sync them individually to my phone. And I went back to Graham and said, wow, look, these kids have done 10,000 steps in your half day or 3 hour soccer school. Oh, that's interesting. Wow. Well, how many do we do a week? And what happens in here? Right. How many millions of steps does this charity actually, and when we talk about impact and trying to get funding from organizations, that's the data points that, you want to start getting into. So then we did another experiment where I thought, right, what if we give the data back to the children at the end of the session? So we'll go, hey, James, today, or, your daughter, turned up today and did 8,000 steps, and she did 6,000 last time. So she's got a new personal best. And so I did that. I was still working full time. I had a mate who did all the tech side of stuff. I thought there's something really exciting here. So I just thought, right, it's time to screw it, quit my job, and dived into this full time. And my approach on this, again, the innovation and ideas, was I just went for it and tried stuff out. So we then turned that into, as a parent, I'd get your mobile phone number, And we built a system that every time I sync the bands, it would automatically send you a text message about your daughter. And you'd sign the GDPR and all the consent and stuff. But we were very clever in that it wasn't that she was top of the class or bottom of the class, because we know who the fittest is and we know who isn't. And again, some of that childhood learning, I guess, of what I got from my sporting stuff was, it was all about you. It was about your personal best, or who's the most improved. So who's got the highest percentage difference. We might compete if your school's got a house group in, the Reds against the Yellows or whatever your houses are called. But we put this service together, put this little box of boost bands, they were called, and took them into school classrooms. We got classes competing against each other, built it into some STEM stuff. So again, it was more at the primary school level, getting addition and subtraction.
So they're using the data, like extracting the data and manipulating it.
Exactly. Collectively, they were traveling, piloted it in Nottingham, went from Nottingham to London and then Nottingham to Paris and Nottingham. How many kilometers is that? And we've done that in steps. So worked with Forest, worked with Reading, Yorkshire Cricket Club, and a few other organizations. And from a sort of innovation perspective, was it desirable? Kids loved it. Teachers loved it. It broke down these sort of barriers that happen in the classroom where, there might be two kids that don't get on, but actually they're in the same team now, trying to get more boost points than the other teams. The kids had a bit of a run around and then they were calmer and more focused in lessons. There were all these sort of second order consequences of actually putting some pedometers on stuff. So schools loved it, kids loved it, parents loved it. The tech stuff was all right, but you had bands breaking, kids losing them.
Yeah, I was going to say, when in timeline, when was this? Because I'm guessing obviously the tech's just improving constantly. Was that one of your biggest challenges at the time? Looking back, would you say like maybe ahead of the time in terms of the tech, or not? Your idea of tech catching up?
I think we used the appropriate tech that made sense. So you can give a kid a £10 smart band. You can't give them a £400 device and have 30 of them in the classroom, because like, how much is this kit going to cost? And what if one breaks? What if a kid, frankly, doesn't give it back? And all those sorts of things. But what you found, you're absolutely right, is like, because the sector's moved on so much, well, kids are wearing these smartwatches themselves. They're looking at their heart rate and their, ECG on their own device. So my little thing that has a little dot, it probably works if you're very young. But if you get to a sort of 10, 11, 12, 13, you're like, well, I've got an Apple Watch, or I've got a whatever, my own Fitbit. So there was a challenge there. But the biggest problem, the biggest lesson, there, and again, in any of this in business, is viability. Like what are the economics here? How is this a business? And we were trying to sell this as a SaaS platform, as subscription essentially to schools or to councils. And people go, wow, this is great, but we haven't got any money. We're not doing anything like this. It doesn't exist. Pupil
so it's kind of like, what budget are we going to use for this? Is that they didn't know where to pull it from yet? Yeah,
and I'm going, well, I've just given up a well-paid job, and I've got a kid and a mortgage, and my wife's on maternity leave.
What was that like? What was that like at the time, to that decision? Or obviously the decision might have been an inspired one at the time, but then afterwards, did you have any second thoughts and things to walk away from that?
I think if you ever found your own business, you'll meet another founder, and you know their passion for their business. Doesn't matter what it is. It's just a part of you, and you're so, you think about it all the time. So I think about it, it's an awful analogy, but it's like professionally having a child, basically. It needs your attention and nurture, and you want to spend all your time in it, and you want to obsess over it, as you do with a parent when you have a child. And we had a little baby at home, so I had the sort of first time being a parent, and then this job, and then it just got the tech.
But it's all consuming though as well, isn't it? Like you said,
all consuming. It's wonderful, but then at the end of the day, you do get down to, well, we live in London, we've got got lots of bills to pay, and I was trying to pitch to investors and look at the business case. The NHS was saying, if you can prove this helps prevent diabetes, we've got loads of money. I'm like, well, that's a clinical trial. That's going to take, come on. Again, so tried really hard, but it wasn't going to work. So it was a really nice idea. And it's taken me a long time to get over it, to mourn it, to be honest. And probably with Planet Super League has helped coming along. But I remember Boost sort of deciding, look, I've got to go back. And I ended up doing some consulting jobs and bits and bobs. But I really felt like a big loss professionally, having to stop. So I love chatting about it, but you do realize that, it's really sad. When you look at the sort of physical activity provision, and the proportion of like 1 in 3 children leave primary school overweight and obese. Yeah. And there's so many reasons behind that. But unless you get people into sport, or get them to think about their diet and their lifestyle. We're continuing to head towards this horrendous world where people are going to get really, really ill. Forget about like, do they look good and feel good? Just like the healthcare costs of diabetes and things like that are just spiraling out of control. So I think getting interventions into young people, and intervention sounds awful, but like inspiring them at a young age is good. But I've always been about stuff that scales. So yeah, it's brilliant. Do something in one school or with one teacher and with one kid, and there's a great case study. The thing is, if there's a million of those kids, how are you going to get to all of them? Because we're having that same thing with Planet Super League, is trying to do something that does have a scaled effect.
Obviously, feels like the best time to introduce Planet Super League. But in terms of your decision, I know we talk about in terms of business, startup, marketing, sustainability, and we're going to touch on it slightly, but that has obviously been a huge aspect of your career and led to what you're doing now with Planet Super League. Are you able to speak to kind of your decisions in terms of the steps taken to launch the current Planet Super League program as it is today?
Yeah, it's funny we not brought it up at all, but I've spent the majority of my career working in this sustainability space, living greener, whatever you want to call it, climate change. And it's all been about people and trying to make it more fun or more interesting or appealing to, try and get people to live greener. And it's that's
got to be, so I was just going to say, that's got to be for you to, if you looking back, if you spent a lot of time on this, it must have felt you kind of, obviously it was always there, but it's never been as well in the consciousness as it is now. If you want me to remember pushing the boulder up the hill a little bit. Do you feel like now we have, the awareness is there, and maybe we're not doing enough, obviously we're not doing enough, but do you feel with distance traveled has been significant since you started out?
I started getting involved in it was 2007. So that's a bit of time ago now. And there've been lots of businesses, big brands who have very early on been passionate about this from a operations perspective and sort of seeing the light quite early, if you will. And even prime ministers like Tony Blair did a lot on this. And I was in that space at that time when I was like in my mid-20s, and quite a lot of imposter syndrome in terms of people I met and the meetings I did and at that age. But what's really difficult is moving it from the sort of government business internal thing to actually just normal people. So with Planet Super League, what we're trying to do is, if you're just a normal Stoke City, Forest, Hull City, Lincoln fan, I think you're an Arsenal fan, if I'm right.
Yeah, that's right.
Which has no link with where you've ever lived, so we can talk about that later on.
Yeah, exactly.
Try and understand why. But if you're just an ordinary Arsenal fan, has there been anything on sustainability that's really resonated with your life? Like Greta at the moment is amazing in that she's pushing an agenda really hard, and there's a particular audience that are massively passionate about her and really get on board. What we found with a lot of our audience is that she actually scares them and she makes parents feel guilty about what they're not doing. And so she might work for a certain audience, but she doesn't work, in lots of ways. Same as Extinction Rebellion, protests and big movements and, laying down in the road to get homes insulated. Like there's always a place in society for the protest movement. But again, you talk to the ordinary football fan, in our case, they're like, well, they've got a very different take on what they think of those people. They don't see them as a good thing. They see them as, well, you're a pain in the backside.
Sometimes it come across a bit too righteous, right?
And so I mean, like from a basic perspective, like we all need to eat better foods, planetary, like from the planet perspective, we need to waste less food, we need to travel less, we need to basically we need to heat our homes in different ways. There's a whole bunch of things, but they're all in different parts of your life. They've all got lots of barriers and challenges behind them. And as I said earlier, there's always been Greenpeace and organizations out there, but it's never connected with just normal people. It's never been, okay, there are a few things that have helped. I think things like Tesla and the technology that's come out and gone, actually, there's a new type of car which looks awesome and performs awesome. Actually, it's fully electric, and it's sort of completely transformed the car industry and continues to disrupt that massively. But there's only tiny pockets of that. It hasn't really happened that much in us. So we've not been inspired by a new bit of technology, a bit like when iPhones first came out and it sort of changed the landscape of the world. And so that's one thing that's sort of not there. And so with Planet Super League, I met this guy, James, who said he was massively passionate about football, really passionate about the planet, and said, well, can we use the power of football to inspire people to live greener? And I thought, wow, that's quite interesting question. And we'll do my usual approach of trying some stuff out. So we started with 5 football clubs, and we've got 63 football clubs that we now work with, nearly all the clubs in the Premier League, including Arsenal and Tottenham. And the idea is really, really simple, James, right? So you're an Arsenal fan. Imagine on your phone, you get a pop-up saying, it's the Planet Super League Challenge and Arsenal are losing 10-8 to Tottenham and there's an hour to go. You go to our website and you can score some goals by taking some green action. That can be a meat-free meal, line drying your clothes, switching to green energy. We've got about 130 different things you can do. Some quick and easy, some that you can do with your daughters, some that you can do at work, or some you can do at the football match. And the idea is that you score goals for Arsenal in Planet Super League by doing something green. The important thing is that you're not pledging and promising, you're actually doing it. So you have to upload a photo showing us your meat-free meal or your walking, not driving the car, for example. So we have a VAR system, and we actually check that you're not cheating, because people cheat because you don't want to lose to Spurs. And we've been doing that for the past couple of years. Started with 5 clubs, we've got 63. We've worked with Sky and the BBC, and we've had over 100,000 actions taken on our platform. And so what we're trying to do at very, very early stages, but talk about sustainable living through being a football fan. And that, you might not be a crazy fan, but maybe your daughter plays in a school team.
I was going to say, one of the things I like about it as well is that, like you said there, there's a lot of messaging, and especially now the way people consume information, whether it's social media or whatnot, you've got a trusted source kind of baked in with the club. So whether it's, like you said, could be coming from the left or from the right, or climate change isn't real, whatever, depending on what your feed looks like on social media, you get a totally different news experience. Because of the way you've got the clubs involved, you've got I trust my local club or the club that I support or my kids support. So that message is coming through, not as there's nothing else on it. It's just truth. Right? This is just what the situation is.
Right. And the thing we say to football clubs is, let me ask you, what is the biggest thing Arsenal can do for the planet from a climate change perspective? What's the biggest thing they could do?
I'm trying to think now. I was going to say something like travel, or they're using the private jets and stuff, but I'm guessing it's to do with the fans, maybe.
Yeah, and your kind of first point is where people go, like fly less, or make the stadium greener. Like, that's good, and they need to do that stuff. It's the get your house in order stuff. The biggest thing Arsenal can do is inspire their fans to eat a meat-free meal, to switch to green energy, to get kids out in nature and fall in love with the bugs and the birds and the animals, because they'll care. Because at the end of the day, Arsenal are an entertainment brand that, for you, are one of those organizations that, you might follow them on Twitter or whatever, but you're talking to your Tottenham fans, your Arsenal mates, about the game, about what's going on, about debating. It's part of who you are. It's part of your identity. And that's the power that a football club has on us, and whether into other sports as well. That's the power that sport has on us, is it brings us together en masse. Half the world's population watched the last World Cup, for example, and we know it's just part of society. And so you've got to do it in the right way. Arsenal are a football club at the end of the day. They're not a climate change campaigning organization. But I remember Arsenal did, again, a groundbreaking, that white shirt that they wore in the FA Cup game against Forest. And that was about knife crime. And they worked with Adidas, the kit sponsor, and they made a one-off shirt for that match. And I think they had Ian Wright and Idris Elba behind it. And that was all about essentially looking at a very, very important issue in the Islington, Highbury area around knife crime, and actually stepping up and say, actually, as a brand, we've got not just a responsibility, we've got the power here to really put this on the map. And
got the platform to do something. Yeah.
Exactly. And so that's what we do with football clubs. And we've proven out now that just a few hundred fans taking some action, this was at Northampton Town, one of our clubs we work with, saves more carbon footprint than the entire carbon footprint of Forest Green Rovers. That's just 500 fans doing some stuff in their everyday lives. So that whole thing of doing your bit and lots of people, well, football has lots of people. What we're trying to do is find really fun and interesting ways to inspire people to do their bit. And a quick bit I'll add is you've got a daughter at school, like I have, and what we're finding, the change you've said in the sort of sustainability spaces. I don't know what it's like in your household, but Grace, my daughter, said to me the other day, which bin does this bit of rubbish go in? And I said, it's got to go in the rubbish bin. And she was in tears, because she said, but that means it's going to end up in the ocean and it's going to end up in landfill. And that's because at school, they've been talking about recycling and waste. And so you're actually getting a lot of kids coming home from school And no disrespect, but they're coming home knowing more about sustainability than their parents are.
Yeah, for sure. It's a lifestyle change we want to try and instill right from the early age.
Right. So I think we are hitting this thing with all the other changes happening in society, where actually giving young people the agency and the ability to, take part in something like this, rather than it being the typical parents are in charge, we'll tell you what we're doing. That's one element that works well in Planet Super League. The other element that is well worth mentioning, because it's contrary to sport, right? So Arsenal's performance in the league table is down to those players and the coaching staff and a few other things, but ultimately the performance of the players on the pitch on the match day that dictate where Arsenal finish in the league. In Planet Super League, it's the fans. So Saka can say whatever he wants about Planet Super League. It's about what are you going to do, James, for Arsenal? And so the trophy that at the moment's in Cambridge United's trophy cabinet, Burnley have won it, Leicester have won it. That's won by the fans for action the fans are taking. And the role of the club is to inspire the fans to do more, which is the role reversal of what we do as football fans.
Yeah, and Leicester City are reigning champions, right? Is that
they won the first sort of proper one.
The first one, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
So we've got the league runs at the same time as the Premier League as well, and in line with it. Or?
Yeah, we've been looking. We don't quite do it that way. What we do at the moment is we run tournaments, so a bit like the Euros or the World Cup, like short fixed ones. We did a big one in the run up to the COP Summit, which was in Glasgow last year, which Cambridge won, and we're looking to do another one later this summer, which I'll look forward to telling you about soon. But the idea is that you treat it a bit like a Movember or a Veganuary, where you've got you're trying to focus people's minds. And the key thing on this is just getting a big celebrity or a big name to put a message out does not drive action. That's one big thing we've learned. You need that, but what you need is stuff happening at the grassroots level. But you need school teachers to have packs. You need that community trust footballing organisation out there. You've got to work with materials for parents at half term or whatever it may be. And so you need both of them working together. And so that's what we spend our time with the football clubs doing, but schooling organizations and finding, we're a small startup. We sort of talked about, like, I need to figure out what's our TikTok strategy. How do we engage, a student population or people in their mid-20s, and like what's the message there? If they're Arsenal fans, they're living a very different life to you, and you're living a very different life to the one you had pre-children. And so I think that that's one of the big challenges with what we're trying to do, is football fans or sporting fans are from all pockets of society and all different life stages. And
you mentioned obviously currently feeling like still in startup stage. What's the kind of the model? Is it like a fully funded model, or the clubs getting involved? Are they contributing financially, or is it fundraising? How does it? And obviously anyone who's listening who wants to get involved as well, how would they go about it outside of just participating as a fan and completing the actions?
Yeah, so we James and I set it up as a sort of purpose-based organization, which I guess is a nice way of saying, we've got equity in the business and we'd like to make a profit. We're a massive loss-making organization at the moment. James is funding it himself, but in the main top of the articles of association is this impact on the planet is what we're about. So we're about to kick off a round of fundraising, and we're looking at evolving the proposition and how do we really cement this, not just in football, but in other sports, and how do we make this a really desirable property? So we've done various pilots over the time.
I was just going to say, sorry to cut you off, I was going to say, like, kind of, we have these peaks where, like, Wimbledon's the one, right? In the UK, everyone's out Wimbledon 2 weeks. You've got like a captured audience who really want to do something and get involved. Generally, they're going down to the park with the tennis rackets and stuff. Yeah. If you can, it feels like it could transfer the model into these Olympics, whatever it might be at the time.
And that's exactly the idea. And so what we're kind of constantly looking at the business model for this, but what we turn to quite a lot are ultimately brands. So yeah, Wimbledon have got people like Robinsons, and they've got Slazenger, and they've got Rolex, and World Cups have got all sorts of sponsors. And those, you've got brands who have got a particular link with that audience, a particular product and service. And with the sustainability stuff, we want you to get your next car as an electric vehicle. We want you to try plant-based food. We want you to make your home more energy efficient. So you actually have to buy. We're not trying to get you just to consume like crazy, but you actually do need to consume a bunch of things in order to be greener. So that our model is sort of based on working with brands who, are passionate and have made big commitments in this space, but are looking to engage a football audience on this. But a bit like Boost and a bunch of things I've done in my kind of career, it's right at the sort of early stages. And one of the things is kind of like, is timing. And I think it's clear that the spotlight is falling more and more on football clubs, and we've seen.
I mean, I was gonna say about, you got the World Cup in Qatar, right? So that probably goes against everything we're talking about in terms of sustainability and having stadiums that are fully air conditioned or built just for this event. So it sounds like they maybe need to do something to offset that challenge.
And so this is where you get into, when you put football and sustainability together. A lot of people are like, well, what do you mean by that? And the stakeholders, so the football leagues and the UEFA, or awarding these, just even the construction and how like properly was that done. Like now we're getting into politics, and that's because sport's so powerful and influential. I mean, the stories of Chelsea's ownership have just continued to be on sort of front page and back page of sport for weeks now, and you think, wow, this really is when that Super League idea came along, we saw quickly what the fans thought of that idea. So you really are, and this is why we love being in the space, because it is clearly so important to people. But we need to work with all these partners and organizations if we're going to influence and inspire fans. One of the hardest ones we didn't touch on are players themselves. So you know exactly how this story is going to go. Of course, I want a high-profile footballer, men and women's footballer, to talk about this thing. What is the first question that the media do the minute that player X puts their name to a sustainability thing? Well, how many cars do you have? Why do you go on a private jet? And so that player, it's quite different to say Rashford and food, because he's got a very, very personal story to tell and authenticity from day one. But there are barely anybody with pure authentic stories around living sustainably, because it sort of has never existed, and it goes contrary to the kind of cultures that we've been building. So it's fraught with, like you kind of say, these really, really tricky things. But we can't just bury our head in the sand and go, okay, well then we won't use sport and football, because unless it's perfect, then it's just going to get criticized. So
yeah, exactly. And then you go the other way to be like, unless you are like Greta Thunberg, traveling on boat, taking 3 weeks to get to travel on boat and giving everything up and not buying new clothes, etc., then you're not valid in terms of your efforts. So it may be a bit of a segue in terms of more personal question, a couple of them for you, in terms of obviously a huge challenge and ambitious goals and a challenge to communicate and change opinion lives and people's lifestyles, etc. How do you deal with kind of stresses? I know you talked about startup life and running a business and raising funding and all that, all the challenges that come into it. Do you have anything that you always kind of go back to, or any strategies that you use to manage your time and your energy and stay on top form?
Sport.
Basketball 3 times a week, right?
Sport is, for me, particularly now, is the outlet, is that slither of the pie chart where I say, that's mine. Okay. Yeah. I don't have to be a husband. I don't have to be a boss. I don't have to be a parent, a co-worker. I can be a teammate. And I'm doing it's playing out 2 ways. Sometimes there's a really sort of competitive side. So there's a basketball match we're playing, and there's the competitive side. Actually, what I'm loving is, because you could probably sense this, I love learning and getting into a new space and playing around with it and seeing where I can go. So when I started playing basketball, I was 16, and they didn't really teach me the fundamentals. So I've got to 40, and I'm pretty solid now, but I'm 40, so I'm not the quickest, but I'm very, I say cautious. I know what I can do, and I do that well. So I won't let you down on a team, and I'll work my butt off because I'm really sort of driven, and I've got a lot of energy and desire to do well. But what I've learned is playing at Oxford, I joined this team, and there's a coach there, Frankie, who I join in the under 18s training and with the men's, and the men's are like the 21, 22-year-olds. And that, for me, for those 2 hours, 2 or 3 times a week, it's a really structured training where there's a coach who goes, this is what we're doing, then we're doing this, you go over here, you go over here. And for the first time,
you switch off.
I'm switched off, and I'm not in control. No one's saying, Tom, where should we go here? Tom, let me tell you these things, interpret it and come back and, respond to it. I'm literally being told what to do. And in a group where everyone is, and that sort of regimented thing. I've got mates who, took up things like boxing, where they're just getting coached and sparring a little bit, where they're going just to get some discipline. It's almost like I love moments with either a finite job where you go cut the grass, and you just cut the grass. or, go down to the post office and return that thing, or go and get 2 pints of milk. I love those little jobs, but the sport is a good one where I go, I'm going to get fit, have a bit of fun with some guys here, but I'm being told what to do. And I see benefit, health. I come back buzzing, losing some weight, feeling like I've accomplished something. And from a basketball skills perspective, I've got way better than, probably better than I ever have been as a player. So sport, I'd say, has been, if you take that away from me when we're in lockdown, I think what I found hard, and I'm sure you appreciate this as a parent, is you're in a room at home and you're running your business. And then the second you open your door, you're a dad and a husband or a partner in that second. So that buffer that we used to have in the commute or head to the pub after work or have a drink with someone, like that 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever it was, disappeared. And I don't think our brains aren't equipped to binary just switch.
No, and it was repeatedly throughout the day as well, right? So you're going back and forth without just the thing. But yeah, like you said, with sport, really interesting for me, because for me, I totally agree. There's nothing else really that I think of that can just get you in the moment so quickly. So playing basketball, you can't think about it. You have to be present at that time. Something's going to happen. You're going to get hit in the head with the ball. Someone's going to throw it to you. You're not ready. So you can't be anxious about the future or depressed about the past. You have to be living in it. Right. That's difficult to get there with anything else so quickly. Tom, I'm conscious of your time. I want to be respectful of that. I've got just one last question. And we always reflect on, it's my same question we ask all of the guests, to reflect and to think of one piece of advice you could give to your younger self if you're going to go back and be able to speak to 20, 21-year-old Tom and give you one piece of advice. What would that be?
I've always been, I can see now it's played out that I will work my socks off, and I've got a lot of energy, and I've got a lot of will and drive. And I think I knew that when I was younger. And the best advice I give myself will be, that will get you an awfully long way, whether you've got the natural abilities in that area of your life, whether it's sport, professionally or even personally. But if you've got that in your locker as a basic part of who you are, do you know what? You'll find a way through. And I mentioned resilience a bit in the past, but you'll get knocked down. It won't go quite right. I've been in jobs. I took a job once and I lasted there 2 days and ended up in a massive argument with my wife and parents because I said, I'm not going back. I cannot stand this place. And they went, and you've got to stick with it. I mean, no, it's not right. And I knew that was true. And it definitely was right. And I've had so many of those sort of, fall off the horse, dust yourself off, get back on. Yeah. Built up a lot of resilience for it. And it hasn't turned into being negative and pessimistic about all the stuff. But navigating our lives are really hard, and navigating our careers are hard as well. You don't know what's around the corner. And I think the advice I'd give to myself is, those basic, if you've got the desire and the will and the drive, you will figure out how to navigate this. It just might not be this constant,
linear curve. Yeah.
Linear, it's going to go continually up. If I look at my salary, it's that's one marker of this. It's if I look at my happiness, it's definitely not in line with the salary from that perspective, or security, maybe if we look at it from a different perspective. And so that's the thing, is almost I'd say to myself, look, trust that you've got some really great traits here, and don't be so afraid of getting knocked off the horse, because you'll get back up. And that changes as you both of us have got 2 children, very young children. And I think when you add on that awesome level of responsibility, that until you're a parent, you just don't know what that means. And not just financial responsibility, but like you say, picking up a daughter from nursery because they're not very well, and therefore your entire plan for the day is, Yeah, and there is no alternative. That's what I've got to do now, and you do it because that's the most important thing in your life. But you'll find a way to navigate that situation. And I think the workplace, because of COVID, and I think this hybrid working is part of it. I think that workplaces now, the flexibility has to be in there, so that we should feel a little bit less afraid about, certain organizations or culture, but afraid to ask to say, I need to go to the doctors, or, hey, exactly. You know what, I'm struggling a bit today with my mental health, can I dip off this call? And so I think a lot of taboo subjects slowly and in a good way starting to change.
Yeah, definitely made managers or business owners more empathetic. Like it's hard not to be if you've had Zoom calls with your kids walking in and doing that or having to juggle everything and people see you've just watched it happen. So yeah, definitely. But I totally agree with your sentiment there in terms of advice to your younger self. And Tom, it's been great to have you on today. I really appreciate giving so much time. We'll link everything in the show notes in terms of anything Planet Super League, anyone wants to get involved. And then any, if it's all right with you, any partners that are listening that think it's going to be a good fit. I think there's a lot of listeners that for me would be a good fit. So hopefully they'll reach out and it goes from strength to strength.
Thanks so much, James. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for listening to this week's show. You can subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can write to us at dryphase.podcast@coordinate.cloud, tweet us at Coordinate Sport, or follow us on Instagram at coordinate_sports, or on my account at James_ventures. This episode was produced by Nancy Kwamboka, with support from Claire Goodchild and Lola Small, with special thanks to Rochelle. I'm James Moore, and you've been listening to The Drive Phase from Coordinate Sport.